Thanks, Renee. Well, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here. I kind of did a brief survey of those that were on the call today, and it looks like we have a very wide variety of folks that coming from basic science, clinical science, and other areas. So we're excited to kind of lay out for you a little bit of our understanding of what an inclusive, effective learning environment might look like as it pertains to classroom education, clinical education, virtual settings, which this may be a week for that. I think we'll start by just maybe briefly introducing ourselves. I don't know, as I looked at the group, that we need that much introduction, but we can do that nonetheless. Um, I'm Aubrey Knight. I've been involved in medical education at the graduate or undergraduate level for nearly 40 years. And so I've seen an evolution in the way in which the learning environment is treated, and the way in which learners are expected to function, and educators are expected to function, and it truly has been an evolution. Clinically, I'm a family doc and a geriatrician, and currently I'm section chief for geriatric medicine at Carillion Clinic, and for the next what is it, 2 weeks? I'm still the phase two director at VTC. I've been had a couple of different roles at VTC, but the longest tenure was as the student affairs dean for the chunk of my VTC career. So Renee, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Like Aubrey, everybody on the call knows who I am, but this may be a little bit of a different introduction. I'm an educator. I'm in basic science education and a biochemist by training. I'm also an avid runner, which this weather I will be out in shortly, even though it is not ideal, but it's I'm always up for the challenge. Um, I am team-based learning and problem-based learning is very much my wheelhouse, which requires this very safe environment for. And I am a constant renovator, so improvement is well within my nature. So these are we're just want to set the stage with our presentation assumptions for everybody in the group. Our audience is mostly physicians and educators, and everyone has a varying background or experience in what they consider to be, their educational setting. So I think that's goes without saying. Our challenge here is always rethinking what learning looks like in each and every one of these contextual settings, whether that be shifts, situational shifts or generational shifts, as we all heard about last week. And those can all present with varying levels of challenge. And then resources, right? We're all very busy individuals. Our time is limited, but we're very conscientious, and I think everybody is continually open to learning about how best to adapt to the learning environment and how best to put that foot forward. So these are our objectives, and these are very broad, but to identify key elements of our inclusive learning environment. Again, defining that learning environment, however that is for your mental lexicon, how you interface with students the most. And then looking at applying evidence-based instructional strategies to enhance participation and accessibility for our learners so that they can be the best they can in all of our settings here. So we're just want to start the conversation with getting everyone on a level playing field about what is included in the learning environment. And you can pop comments in the chat. You're welcome to just unmute and share your thoughts here. But really thinking of what are all the things and spaces when we say the word learning environment to consider.
While we're waiting for others, I will tell you a little story from the our first LCME prep visit. So we had the consultants come in at the very beginning of the school, and they asked a group of us, and I can't recall exactly who. I remember a few of the people that were in the room, but so tell us about your learning environment, and we piped up and we're proud to talk about our library and our classrooms and our um, spaces that we had for students. And we're quickly reminded that the learning environment is a lot more than that. And I'm seeing some of the chats that you guys are getting it. You know what the learning environment is. I see
Yes.
essentially everything, that's exactly right. If it impacts learning, it's a part of the learning environment. Yes, the library and the classrooms are part of it, but it's much more than that.
Yeah, even what people bring from outside the classroom, that's also a great comment there. Psychological safety. Yeah, I think we've got it here. So yeah, absolutely. So when we think of the learning environment, we've got to think of these major categories here. It's not just about the physical and virtual space and adequacy for learning. So do we have that the space, does everyone have a seat? That is one real minor in my mind. It is not a major component when we think of this learning environment, although it's important. And often for the social and scaffolding relationships and interactions, as well as the personal identity formation and personal growth, make up so many key aspects of the learning environment. And then we have the organization itself. So how does VTCSOM, their accreditation and organizational culture, as well as our curricular resources and structure, which is now our identities curriculum, how does that impact this learning environment? So we're all on the same page here as we start to think about the learning environment involving many more things than just our new coffee shop and library, although very important. So when we think about how a VTC strives towards a positive learning environment, we can think about our shared understanding. And I'm going to turn it over to Aubrey for all of these.
Yeah, so this came straight from the VTC page on the website. If you click on the learning environment, when you go to the website, this is what first comes up, and then you can click onto each of these areas and learn a little bit about what it is. And um, uh, the um, the gist of why this page exists and why these things are important really comes down to our accreditation. And um, I'm just going to read what the LCME says we as a medical school are responsible for when it as pertains to the learning environment. They say a medical school ensures that the learning environment of its medical education program is conducive to the ongoing development of explicit and appropriate professional behaviors in its medical students, faculty, and staff at all locations, and is one in which all individuals are treated with respect. The medical school and its clinical affiliates share the responsibility for periodic evaluation of the learning environment in order to identify positive and negative influences on the maintenance of professional standards, develop and conduct appropriate strategies to enhance positive and mitigate negative influence, and identify and promptly correct violations of professional standards. And I say all that, and we wanted to remind you of that because, and we've got a slide later on about the Learning Environment Advocacy Committee, because I know that sometimes seems punitive and sometimes seems like this committee that's looking at finding fault in the way and allowing students this anonymous ability to identify things that they are concerned about with regard to the learning environment or a particular educator. And while yes, it's a yes and we are responsible to create a learning environment that does support the students, that is respectful of students where they are, but also remember that it's also the learning environment is not just about the students, it's about the faculty and staff as well. So the faculty need to be supported, the staff need to be supported, as so it's an all-encompassing uh, uh, environment that we live. So on this website, and we don't have it pulled up, so I'm not gonna click onto these things just to show you, but there are examples of things that could be considered mistreatment, standards for the treatment of our learners and each other. There also are examples of exemplars of learning environment and what how particular faculty members, students, and staff are identified as being just that. So I would encourage you while you're snowed in to kind of take a look at this and remind yourself of what is the expectation for our learning environment and for us as faculty.
So that segues us beautifully into the teacher learner compact, which really does sort of drill down what those expectations are. And I'm really glad that Aubrey just mentioned there are exemplars. So oftentimes we think of this, or it's thought of as this punitive, always punitive in reporting, but there are key exemplars that we like to draw out to say these are instances where people are shining in this area and creating some really wonderful safe spaces for learning. And so just as we sort of think about the teacher learner compact is this defined relationship where we have key aspects where as an educator I take responsibility and as a learner I have expectations of for them in that space. And so one very small aspect of this which I want to draw out for everybody is this: to maintain and acquire currency in my professional knowledge and skills. And so, sort of historically, when we thought of ourselves as educators, providing knowledge in the form of information, that information transfer was so sentinel to us as educators, and it still is. Although you'll note it's a small piece of our overall defined compact with our learners. All of these other things play extremely important roles when we think about the learning environment. So modeling the profession, and that again is on many levels, whether that be in the clinical environment or in the educational setting, model those interactions with learners, patients, colleagues, and staff. So uh, really allowing the students to see that and reflect that and embody that. Faculty accepting the duties. So accepting that responsibility and sort of sharing in that mutual respect as you create a community of practice across BTC SOM. You want to nurture that learner commitment to achieve personal, family, and professional balance. And I think, at least in my career here at VTC, we've seen some really great strides towards that balance of, what are we doing both while we're here and what are we doing externally, which has, again, helps create this safe learning environment where we can communicate across this communication chasm, which my perception is getting much less and less, where we have these open and fluid communication channels between the students and the staff and the learners. And then again, there's this mutual level of respect across learners and patients and colleagues that really is essential in making sure the space is safe, and we can have these open, constructive dialogues to help elevate the entire community. So with that.
One of the places uh, where students struggle a little bit with the learning environment, and this I stuck this in here in my current role. I see this all the time. Especially at the very beginning of the clerkship experience for particular students. And there's this 2017 paper that looked at what are student perceptions around that transition from phase one to phase two. Um, uh, we as educators, we know I mean, we created the curriculum. We know what the expectations are and how things are different. But just for those of you who are strictly in phase two, phase one is very structured. The number of hours per week that the students spend in class or expected to do outside of class is very defined. Um, the schedule is pretty set. They know it from the beginning of a semester or a block, and they know what to expect every day. Um, for those of you in phase one, that is nothing like what phase two is. Phase two is much less structured, much more chaotic, much less with expectations that are going to vary not from semester to semester and block to block, but from day to day and clerkship to clerkship. So in this study, not surprisingly, students reported significant difficulties in that transition, and those difficulties were relative to the new environment, going from a classroom and lab environment to a clinical environment. They experience difficulties relative to the expectations, and they rightly recognize that the expectations were less clear. Either the daily expectations of what they were to do, or the objectives from a clerkship itself, and then very difficult transition relative to the workload. Um, the hours are less defined. There there is not built-in time for study usually, or at least the time for study is when you're not in your clinical setting. Um, the students reported that their perceptions of the learning environment, the global perception of the learning environment in phase two was less positive than it had been in phase one. And this is a quote from the authors. The stress of the clinical learning environment may affect student professional identity formation, maintenance of well-being, and academic performance. Now, this study did not do a lot to say how do we mitigate that? How do we prevent this from occurring, other than to say it's really all about communication and setting those expectations, reminding students of the difference in the environment between what phase one and phase two was going to be, but a real difference in this particular surveyed study. Which leads me to an area that actually one of you mentioned when you were asked what the learning environment is, and then another of you on the call has been given a talk with me around psychological safety. And Chad, you'll notice that I completely included some of the slides from that talk. So with due respect for and acknowledgement of Chad DeMott's assistance with me in that previous talk on psychological safety, I'm going to spend a few minutes just defining it and helping you hopefully understand why I believe this is a way in which we as clinical educators in the clinical learning environment can at least help our students through that challenging transition and through the difficulties of the clinical learning environment. So the concept of psychological safety is not a clinical um, concept in and of itself. It was coined by Dr. Amy Edmondson from the Harvard Business School, and she said it's a belief that one can share one's thoughts, feelings, ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes without fear of punishment or humiliation. It's basically a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect, and it enables team members to take risks, be creative, and learn from each other. In the business world, this is not necessarily learners and educators, but I think it very clearly can fit into the learning environment, into the clinical learning environment. Um, so it involves setting the stage, it involves inviting participation, and it involves responding proactively. So setting the stage, whether that's daily or at the beginning of whether it's more global at the beginning, like of phase two, reminding students of what the purpose and expectations are for phase two. At the beginning of a clerkship, reminding students what the goals of that particular clerkship are, and what the expectations are going to be. Or at the beginning of one day, one set of rounds. What are we going to do today? What are we here to accomplish today? How are we going to incorporate learning into our taking care of our patients? Um, uh, Psychological safety includes inviting participation and acknowledging that all voices are credible, and that as a team we can do things differently and better based on the voices that are responding. And then When there are needs for responding, that we do that productively, that we express appreciation, that we acknowledge those voices that are involved in that learning environment. And I see it, we can move to the next slide, Renee, as um, and oh yeah, before we get to what I was about to say, this is a great little four quadrant thing that I think illustrates this well. And I used to show it to student, or I have shown it to students to help them understand that while up in that upper right hand quadrant might feel good. Um, it's both safe and comfortable, but you're probably not going to grow in that quadrant. It's really in the lower right-hand quadrant where we grow, where yes, there's safety. We do want to take care of each other and make the learning environment safe. But in order to grow, there sometimes must be discomfort. And as hard as that might be, and as difficult in the moment as that might be, that is where we grow. So this is one of those four quadrant things that I think can be illuminating to students as they struggle with um, the discomfort of the especially the clinical learning environment. So, um, in the clinical learning environment, if we talk about psychological safety in the context of the clinical learning environment, I think one thing we've got to do is recognize that there's a third set of stakeholders here, not just the teacher and the learner. That's clear. We're here to teach and we're here to learn. But there's another stakeholder, and that is the patient, and that has to be acknowledged as we progress through within the clinical learning environment. And then there's some stages of safety that I didn't invent these, but we'll talk a little bit about the stages of safety as well, and what how we as educators can maintain the safety of our students while also challenging them and including them, but also challenging them. So from the learner's standpoint, um, we can move on, Renee. We as educators need to, but maybe communicate explicitly to our learners that it is safe for you to seek to discover new knowledge. It is safe for you to ask questions. It is safe for you to say, I don't know. It is safe for you to experiment with the ways in which you know, create a differential diagnosis, pre, uh, uh, do a presentation to your team, and the only way it can be safe is if we make it safe and we allow for those I don't know moments to be, well, let's explore that as opposed to, what do you mean you don't know? You should have learned that. Um, and then it is safe. It should be safe for as students discover, ask questions, say I don't know, and experiment, that they can learn from their mistakes. That's the way that's the way I learn best is looking back at where I screwed up and uh, trying my best not to let that happen again. But also, it learners need to recognize that it's a safe learning environment when a teacher asks questions. A teacher needs to be safe to ask questions, to share their experience. And sometimes that's sharing experience that maybe we're not proud of. Um, and what we've learned about either clinical medicine or our own professional identity or whatever it is, that we whatever bit of experience we want to share, that we need to feel safe in doing that. Teachers need to feel safe in challenging their learners. They need to feel safe in setting expectations, and setting expectations that are not only achievable, but maybe that are challenging to our students. And we as teachers need to feel safe in being able to give constructive feedback, to be able to tell a student, no, that's not exactly what we're looking for here. Let's explore where you came to that conclusion, and then where we might have where you might have learned to draw another conclusion or whatever. And then remember also the third um, stakeholder in these um, experiences in the clinical learning environment. Remember that our patients are vulnerable. That and as we communicate in front of them, recognize their health literacy. They're hearing us and they want to understand what we're saying. And if we're talking to them in either talking to or talking at them in 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 clinical speak, as opposed to recognizing that we need to speak to them from where they're coming from. We need to recognize their background and the potential misperceptions that they may have, and we need to give them the opportunity to clarify and ask questions. So the clinical learning environment is complex, and again doesn't just involve the teacher and the learner, but involves everything else. Um, and then the three types of safety I just wanted to briefly talk about is inclusion safety, and that means everyone on the team is a part of the team. Everyone is valued. Everyone is treated fairly, able to contribute, and have a sense that their opinions matter. This is the moral imperative of clinical education is the safety of those that are on rounds with us, that are in the OR with us, or wherever it is that teaching and clinical care are being merged. There also is collaborator safety. We should all feel safe as faculty, as faculty to learner, and as learner to teacher, to engage and interact, to demonstrate mutual respect, to be accessible, to foster constructive dialogue. This results in an openness and trust, and I think if we set that expectation, and if we uh, make our learners aware that this is what the expectation is, I think, we'll be given a little bit more grace, if we are to misstep or misspeak or whatever, that might otherwise have been a LEAC report. And then finally, there's challenger safety, and I think we as teachers need to recognize that it's okay for us to be challenged. Um, when a learner challenges a teacher, it may seem embarrassing, but it's okay. It's just like it's okay for the learner to say, I don't know. It's okay for the faculty member to say, I don't know. Let's look that up. Or that is a great question, and I don't know when the last time I thought about that was, but let's investigate that further. It's okay to challenge the status quo, to identify problems in the learning environment as well as within the clinical setting. This that challenger safety allows us to be creative, innovative, and to I think learn ourselves even as we're trying to teach. Which brings us to the uh, Learning Environment Advocacy Committee, LEAC. I understand, and I've heard it actually used by several people that LEAC has become a verb. That a faculty member can say that they've been LEAC'd. So it was not intended to be a verb, but it has become a verb. And I just wanted to remind you. I think recognizing that it is a responsibility of the school to provide an opportunity for learners to identify concerns relative to the learning environment. Um, uh, the LEAC has been in existence for almost the entire history of the school, or some prior iteration of the LEAC from the entire history of the school. Currently, it's an interdisciplinary committee that meets monthly, and there are students, residents, faculty members, clinical and preclinical faculty members. There are nurses on the committee, and um, all reports. I think you know this, but all reports, both the reporter and the subject, are de-identified. So whenever a particular report is shared with the committee, there is no identifying information to try and maybe even bias the committee. Generally, we know that it's a student who made the report or we know whether it's a faculty member or resident just by the way the report is created. But other than that, the reports are de-identified. The committee hears the report. There's actually a triage process that occurs before it comes to the committee to determine whether or not it's actually a learning environment report or is a professionalism or some other non-learning environment kind of a concern. But once it comes to the committee, the committee determines whether or not there is in fact a learning environment issue, and if so, what the severity is, and then determining how to best proceed, what kind of report education needs to occur. The committee has had there are concerns students bring up on themselves, bring student to student, student to faculty, student to resident, student to nurse, other staff. So it's been a across the board kind of a thing. But it is uh, a necessary, and I think for those of you who are on the committee, I'd love to hear your perspectives if we have time at the end about how the committee has evolved, and I do believe it is we are they are learning their way around the best way to address these kinds of things, because the bottom line is we do want a healthy, respectful learning environment here at VTC, and we have to give students the ability to identify concerns relative to their learning environment. A little bit of a non sequitur, but I think is an important thing to bring up relative to the learning environment is humor. We've had teachers had several speakers on humor and gallows humor and these kinds of things over the years. But I think we have to recognize that what's funny to one person is not funny to everyone. Number one, humor in and of itself can be a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism for me, and it can be for many people. Um, it can be used when used well. It can be used to make connections with patients and with learners. Quite frankly, it can break down barriers between folks that are coming at issues and problems and concerns from two different areas. But it also can be perceived as insensitive, um, and many times is in fact when it's not contextualized, or maybe even whether it was contextualized or not, would have been perceived as insensitive. My encouragement to you is if you use humor, let your team know that's what you're doing, and be willing to accept feedback about how it might have been perceived differently than you intended it to be perceived, and then try and aim your humor at common human annoyances rather than aiming it at specific people. That's just again a couple of little things that I try to do as I use humor.
Sorry, everyone. My learning environment here is involving students looking for their mittens to go out sliding in the coldness. But we we want to take the last bit of our talk to look at some common or not so common scenarios when we think about impacts to the learning environment. And so these have been adapted from a MedEd portal publication. And just we're going to kind of go through them constructively together and really want your feedback and thinking about what is the impact of the learning environment on these scenarios, and what approaches could we use, could we crowdsource in this conversation to modify the interaction, and just really asking, are these concerns that you've encountered or you've had, and thinking about the impact in that space. So we'll kick this off with this first scenario here. And this scenario surrounds formative feedback. And so I'm actually just going to pause and let you read these for yourself. And I'm going to give you a few seconds, a few minutes to do that. All right. Hopefully this is something I know we are doing a lot of in phase one is giving lots of formative feedback, meeting with students. And I know that this is also happening in the clinical environment as well, giving specific formative feedback. I also know we are also often very busy individuals. So anybody have any immediate reflections on this or thoughts as to what this does before we sort of unpack the learning environment here? You can pop them in the chat or just be brave and unmute in our learning space. Okay, then I will go forward with this silence and thinking of when Aubrey and I looked at these scenarios, we really like to think about what is the impact on all of the four aspects of the learning environment, the personal, the social, the space, and organizational. And what sort of micro changes? So how would we think about changing this? So I'm gonna flip. There we are. So when we think about unpacking the scenario itself, I'm gonna turn this over to Aubrey to think about what this formative feedback may look like as it's sort of framed in the clinical space.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Permeshwar just chatted to us.
Oh,
This was brief and didn't take didn't I know it said brief and then something else, but brief and
did not respond to the
did not
student's
respond to
interest.
students' interest. Yeah, so we have a busy person giving uh, almost no feedback, frankly, and so I, I I think the first bullet point up here at the top of the slide says this was not developmental. This was very transactional. This person just basically said, you know, I don't have time for this right now, uh, and kind of moved on. It became somewhat faculty centered rather than learner centered. It was based on this faculty member's busyness. Carrie said the dismissiveness, and absolutely very dismissiveness. It did feel like the student was burdensome, and at least the way the scenario was written, this was a scheduled formative feedback. This was supposed to be feedback. This wasn't just a student coming up randomly to a faculty member and asking for feedback. So this was I would suggest not a very good formative feedback session. I think it's we can be distracted. We are busy. We have good days and bad days. And sometimes we are not prepared, even though we've got a scheduled, our schedules get out of whack. And we've got a student coming in, um, uh, they are expecting something from us and we don't have it to give. I think this could have been handled a lot differently if in fact the faculty member was so busy that they didn't in fact have the time at that moment. They could have acknowledged that and made some other arrangements.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Sorry. The only other thing I
no,
want to point out here is on each slide we have these hidden curriculums, which I think are things for all of us to think about how our actions sort of impact that bigger organizational culture at times, even when we don't mean any malice. There's no intent, there's no negative intent here, but the actions often will think about how does this then sort of frame the student's future of other formative feedback sessions? And does it normalize this disengagement or minimal investing in teaching roles?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Renee, is normalizing this not only for them for their expectation moving forward, but for their practice moving way forward. That it's this is the way of medicine. So this is that's what the expectation is going to be for me. I think the second bullet on the hidden curriculum, when preparation for feedback is optional, is that's the message that likely would have been taken by this particular student. Whereas again, we are busy. Our schedules get upside down sometimes. It would have been a better, I think, encounter had this teacher said, I do not like to have formative feedback sessions without having had time to prepare. I thought I was going to have time to prepare for this one, but I didn't. I apologize for that. I know your schedule's busy too, but can we find another time for me to really give you some meaningful feedback? Again, it acknowledges that we do want to be prepared. It acknowledges that we respect their time. It's not just about us. It's about them too. Their students are busy. And it sets the expectation that feedback is important and preparation for feedback is also important.
Yeah, and just a plug for our current phase one learners and our harmonized milestones, they are really embracing the feedback. We have had so many opportunities where learners have come up to me as a phase one faculty member and other phase one faculty members on the call here to say, well, can we schedule a meeting for formative feedback on an assessment, on an opportunity, on an engagement? And so they are primed at wanting some real meaningful, constructive feedback. So that
And following up on that plug, is that the first class that has had the new phase one enters the clinical learning environment on March 2nd. So you're gonna have students on your clerkships that have been socialized to this formative feedback to a much greater degree than prior students. If I had a crystal ball and could point out what I expect might occur in the clinical learning environment from the new curriculum compared to the old, that will be one of them. Is that they really are anxious for feedback and for learning. Uh, Another thing is that, and I don't know whether how this is going to play out, but just to let you know, um, their time has been um, much more strictly monitored and while we get concerns from clinical students now about not enough time to study. We may get more, you all may get more of those in the future. I don't know. We'll see. But we're trying with the preparation for the clerkships to bring students along about, what how the clinical learning environment is different from the phase one learning environment. But that may be something we hear more of.
Hmm. All right. Thanks, everyone. That was a good discussion. And the second scenario really focuses on off campus impact, interactions that we have no real oversight over, and just take a minute to read through this one, and then we'll go through it. All right. Any immediate thoughts or um, reflections on having maybe experienced this or seen what this looks like in your space? I think this one is harder to do in the learning environment. So I'm going to turn it over to Aubrey.
Yeah, so this one is harder, and I was trying to think back to examples in the clinical learning environment about this kind of thing, and I don't really have any, but when I was in student affairs, I had plenty of things that were not dissimilar from this. Um, and I think the faculty being the faculty member that is identified in this, being uh, open and willing to acknowledge and that there maybe was some harm in this and being willing to kind of sit down and walk through it with the student is the right first step to take. Um, uh, Where you go from there, though, is very challenging. Once you're that faculty member and they do open up that um, that Facebook or whatever site, you're now a part. You're now kind of a part of it, and you've got responsibilities and uh, if it's if for instance it's any kind of a Title IX kind of a potential comment that puts you as a mandatory reporter as pertains to Title IX. And so, yeah, it needs to be fraught with some degree of trepidation and recognizing what your role is going to be once you once that is shared with you.
Yeah, we've got a comment. I'm not sure if it matters if the negative comment came from another student, a fellow student. That was the intent, was that it was coming from another student. So this may be something that then was going to then play out in the classroom potentially if they're, in our scenario, if they're on the same clerkship group or in the same PBL group, for example, how these sort of external interactions then sort of frame how they're participating in that space. Um, yeah, that's a great comment. Thanks, Vidya. It is also really important that the student felt comfortable enough. There are positive aspects of this. So thank you for drawing that out, that the student felt safe enough to meet with a faculty member and to tell them that this was happening, and that they felt. But there is a lot of things, as Aubrey mentioned, that are just things that are outside of our control. And so focusing on helping this individual learner navigate through that, their response and their interactions is best. And I think more and more this digital professionalism is not optional, right? We're seeing this more and more in the context of AI use and generation, and setting that example is really important. Anything else? All right, we'll move to the last scenario quickly, and then we want to make sure we give time for questions. So this one's a little more straightforward. All right. Thoughts. I think we've all at some level encountered showing up to class to do something and then having a group of learners that may or may not have prepared to the level or depth that we've anticipated them to. And I think this is something that is potentially a shared experience. But this one posing a little bit more challenge because it relates to the instructional design and potentially the learning management system. So any thoughts there? So kind of disparate than the other two scenarios. This is a really more of a structural or organizational issue or concern. both with the faculty response and thinking about how do we present our learning materials for best outcomes for our students. So this is really more of an instructional design where we can think about how do we organizationally manage this? How do we set these boundaries? And in the curricular restructure, the team has done a great job of really looking, are the resources manageable? Would the students have to spend 4.5 weeks preparing for 1 week of learning because we've all been really excited about posting volumes and volumes of preparation material, and making sure they're presented and available. So thinking of that in that level of consistency. And so this again plays out in the clerkships and clerkship calendars and resources for students, making sure that those resources are available and timely, and there's a clear communication stream really helps the learning management. And we've seen this now in our new identities curriculum and the way that we've been able to roll out materials more consistently across not just a single, what used to be a block, but really across an entire phase, so 3 semesters of learning. Um,
And also in addition that students feel safe when there is, in this case, a broken link or a missing resource, that students feel safe to acknowledge that and seek help from whoever the right person for the help is, as opposed to um, feeling like they don't have the safety to bring that issue up until the end of the block or the clerkship or the whatever, and when they express that as a concern, because I've seen it both ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, we get great communication from our learners and in ways that are, very productive to say this would be helpful or these are things we can't find. And faculty responsiveness has equally been really productive in that, making sure that it's an equitable learning space as well. So this is again something to think about when we're thinking of restructuring, what in your case, many cases, intercessions look like and how these materials roll out, is thinking about what is the usability and the accessibility for the learner. So with that, I just want to finish up. This is the educational mission statement that was crafted several years ago now. Really reflects on the goal of generating this learning environment again that is intended to cultivate lifelong learners and health systems positioned to improve healthcare equity and humility there. And then along with our charge there, really to promote a sense of inclusion within the healthcare team. So being able to really reflect this positive, engaging learning environment as students transition through the healthcare space. So our final slide is really just a summary here. And really, this is just an honest reflection to say we will all fail at this at some point in time. It will happen, and it's important that we try. We be positive, conscientious, and directive. It will likely be uncomfortable at times. I think we've all experienced those moments within the classroom or clinical setting that is just we have to be in that quadrant, as Aubrey mentioned, that is both uncomfortable but supportive of growth, and encourage those conversations. Be open in having the conversations with your teams and with students, and get involved. And so that involvement may look like a variety of different things. But if you see something, it's important to say something and be curious about it in that space. And be honest. I think that I stole this from a book called Steal Like an Artist, and I encourage everybody to pick it up. It's great to have by your desk. And these are its sort of hallmarks there, reminding us we will need to be curious, kind. We will need to have stamina because oftentimes these are a really long frame shift, and the willingness to look stupid, or their words, not mine, but really using that "I don't know" phrase repeatedly if there are encounters that we don't have we don't have the right words for. So with that, Aubrey, any final remarks, and we will take questions. And I want to thank everyone for being here, our students, learners, and colleagues, as well as staff in this space. And thank you for sharing this time with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks. And I appreciate the comments that were made in the chat. I think they were very helpful to us.
Mhm.
And we do have like 4 minutes. So anybody have any specific questions or
Feel free to unmute or post something in the chat and we can pass it along or read it aloud.
I'm going to try and ask a question. I'm not putting on my camera. It's a snow day. Um, um, there's a lot of issues that come up in the learning environment, especially in the first few rotations. They're so eager to learn. They're so eager to be there, so excited. But there are times when there's just this massive disconnect in how the students give feedback. It is so non-constructive at times, and I sit there and I read everything, and I wonder if if they truly recognize the implications of their actions, that they are huge implications, because we do tend to focus on protecting the students. I mean, that is first and foremost, always protect the students, make sure that they're in a safe work environment. But sometimes it becomes a really difficult environment for the faculty.
that's a great comment, Vidya, and one of the reasons why I think the the LEAC has the reputation it has is that's the committee that has to adjudicate at some level some of these comments. I think I it is a tightrope that we have to walk between um, uh, giving students the permission and ability to share their feedback either anonymously through some kind of a portal or directly to us, which doesn't happen all that often. Uh, with helping to educate them on what effective feedback really looks like. And I think we've engaged the student members of the LEAC and tried to get them to be um, uh, ambassadors for the process and help their colleagues to learn how to give better feedback. And I think at some level that's helped, but but you're right, we still get comments that really provide no um, real important, actionable information or ability to address it. And I'm not sure what the solution to that is. Someone smarter than me is going to have to figure that solution out.
We
I
are,
will.
oh, go
Oh,
ahead,
this
Dr. Leclerc.
really, I would love to circle back to this conversation again. As Aubrey mentioned, our new phase 1 learners are moving into phase 2, and they had a very different feedback system with curriculum reps. And so a lot more of the feedback was actually face to face. Not that we still collected end of course and weekly evaluations, which were again anonymous and subset. But I will say my perception is the level of constructive feedback and collaborative feedback that we've engaged between with the students has been really a lot more productive than I have seen previously. So I hope that they take that with them.
Thank you both for a very informative and practical session. Lots of thank yous in the chat. We are out of time for today. So if folks need to sign off for other meetings or responsibilities, of course, feel free to do so. But if there is, another question, I'm sure we could stay on for a minute or so, unless our presenters have somewhere they need to be, in which case we can wrap it up as well.
I have a few minutes, but thank you, everybody.